Maybe
You wanted me to lead?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's go for it.
Okay. Welcome everybody to Language of Lions. My name is Nicole, and this is Monty. You may have heard him quite a bit on TikTok. He's a great debater. But we're not here to debate anyone today. We are going to tell you a little bit about marriage and family and parenting and priorities and God.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So one of the things that we were kind of talking about was our story, like how many people actually know our story and things like that. Like I've actually had people on TikTok, not during debates or anything like that, but like other members of the church kind of like, so how did you and your wife meet kind of deal? It's like, okay, well, I mean, how much can I really truly divulge without, fully doxing myself here? But I think
It's a good story.
It is. I think it's a great story too. So one of the things we met at college.
Through mutual friends.
Yes, through mutual friends. And we got together. She was technically dating another guy at the time. Like,
I guess that's a very generous word. I had gone on a couple dates with a guy.
Yeah.
Everyone around me seemed to think that I was dating him, and he was a really nice guy, but we never had a conversation about whether we were dating, and so in my mind, we weren't.
There is kind of a part of me that is still kind of like sorry about stealing you away from him, even though, like, okay, yeah, you didn't even think you guys were technically dating.
I went into that semester going, I want to date as much as possible because I had been so shy and so stuck up in my apartment my first year of college. And after traveling outside of the United States, I kind of got out of my shell, and I wanted to go do stuff and meet people, and I wanted to date as many people as possible. So in my mind, a couple dates, we had gone on maybe 3 dates.
Yeah.
That didn't indicate dating to me.
Right before I kind of swooped in and swept you off your feet, right? Like that was so.
Yeah, my plan didn't really work out so well of dating as many people as possible. Thanks to this guy.
Ow. But the thing is though is that we did eventually start dating. We actually had that DTR.
Yes. We did.
So we actually were able to get things squared away there.
Well, the first date was magical.
Oh yeah, we really didn't want that night to end, did we?
It was pretty good.
It
was a pretty instant connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, laughing underneath a walkway bridge, like doing our evil laugh kind of deal.
That was fun.
It was a lot of fun. But the thing is that that since then the rest is history. And, we said that we loved each other. And one of the things that ultimately kind of culminated with this is how we determined what our priorities were while we were still dating.
Right.
I remember, we were at your apartment. We were just kind of chilling. I think we had just finished watching a movie. And we were just kind of scrolling through my Facebook at the time.
Yep. And
came across a friend of mine who, is still... who at the time hadn't yet gone on his mission, but on his page he had written, here are my priorities. Number 1 is God. Number 2 is my girlfriend. Number 3 is Twinkies, which I'm still not sure if he was actually serious or not about that.
Well, he had his first priority, right?
That's true. And then number 4 was his family, and that kind of sparked a conversation between us.
Of what our priorities were.
Yeah, exactly. And our priorities we established very first and foremost was to be God. Both of us. And, we kind of agreed with that. And this is also scripturally based too, where, Jesus says, anyone that places father or mother or son or daughter above me is not worthy of me.
God needs to be priority number 1.
Yeah. And then at the time, since we were only dating, we really hadn't had any commitments beyond that. We, established that our second priority would have been our own families. So my mom and dad and siblings and your mom and dad and siblings would be your priority and things like that. And then number 3 would be each other. Mm-hmm. And again, this is while we were dating. And during this time, I had been doing a lot of praying, a lot of, talking with, my parents and things like that. And, while they hadn't necessarily met you officially because, they were several states away, the way that I described you, I think kind of immediately won them over.
How did you describe me?
Oh, boy. You know, well, obviously the whole beautiful aspect, but the thing is though is that it went beyond just the physical attributes, right? Just, your testimony, your faith, the way that you just carried yourself at the time was just something magical, honestly, for lack of a better term. That's kind of the way that I remember it. And so there's just a lot of talking with them. It's like I really like this girl. I really love this girl. And so they're like, well, if you do, then, make sure that you're making the right decision if you want to move it on to the next step. So I got this, compared to other engagement rings, it was cheap. It was $250 from Kmart.
I didn't care.
Yeah, thankfully. You've never been very materialistic, which, thank goodness. But
I'm also not much of a jewelry person.
yeah.
I obviously would have wanted a ring. It would have been very sad had you not gotten one.
Right.
But I don't like wearing jewelry generally. It's kind of a sensory thing.
Yeah. Well, and you kind of notice, like, if people who are watching this will kind of notice that we don't have wedding rings on anymore. And a lot of that is, well, for one, we're very secure in our relationship. Honestly.
And I do love my ring. It's very delicate and beautiful.
Yeah. You still have it. It's like on a chain now. And so, like, you do wear it, like, on special occasions and things like that. But it's never on your finger. It's around that necklace. And I think my wedding band is on there,
together.
Too. They're together. Because that's the way it's meant to, symbolize, our relationship. But I've been doing a lot of praying. And I hadn't really gotten a definitive answer. And so the ring, I had this plan in mind. So I bought the ring, and it was really just like, okay, God, if this is wrong, stop me.
I had the same thoughts, because when I prayed about it, I didn't get a definitive yes or no. I had been praying about it, and so I had remembered that old John By the Way talk.
Yeah.
And thought, well, if it's wrong,
stop me. So that's kind of the way it happened. And then the ring came a week early and blew all of my plans out of the water. Okay, now here's the thing. With me being me, I could have let the ring stay in my apartment, but then all of my roommates would have had that, and they would have blown the lid off of everything because they couldn't keep a secret to save their lives.
You wouldn't have been able to have me over at all.
No, not at all. And so I had the ring in my pocket that entire day that we were hanging out.
It was a nice day too.
It was a nice day.
We flew kites and watched Mary Poppins. It was good.
It was a fantastic day. But, so at some point, so especially us being 4 college kids, we're like, you know what, we're kind of hungry. What should we eat? And you had a box of mac and cheese and some butter, but no milk.
I can't believe I had butter.
Yeah. Well, you had butter. And I had milk at my apartment. And you're like, you know what? Let's make some mac and cheese. We'll go to my place. We'll get the milk and we'll make it there. And as we're walking, with your box of mac and cheese and stick of butter, I'm constantly feeling the ring in my pocket. Like, my hand is in my pocket as we're going out, and I'm feeling the box. I'm like, is it okay? Do or die time. Let's do this.
How many other girls get proposed to with a box of mac and cheese in their hand?
Well, and the thing is that I pulled the box out. I opened it up, and I said, I've been doing a lot of talking with number 1 and number 2. And I left it at that.
Right? He never asked. And then he expected an answer.
Well, you okay, so the question was kind of implied. Right? And so you did leap into my arms, we kissed.
Okay. If you are allowed to imply a question, I am allowed to imply an answer. And giving you and hugging and kissing you after you present a ring is an implied answer. Yes.
However, me being stupid male brain, I had to pull back and was like, so is that a yes? And so
obviously it was.
Yeah, it obviously was. And so we went to my apartment and made mac and cheese as our first official meal as an engaged couple. I did eventually get down on one knee, though, that night.
Yeah, the duct tape
The
girl.
duct tape girl. So as we were actually walking to your sister's apartment to kind of, so you could show off the ring and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, we passed by this girl who was duct taped to a tree.
Literally.
Very literal. No, yeah. And we were like, "Do you need help?" Like we thought someone had pranked her. She's like, "No, I actually wanted this."
It was
What?
like some kind of bucket list thing for
Yeah.
her. It was weird.
Yeah.
But the duct tape girl heard our engagement story and heard that he had proposed today and that he hadn't gotten down on one knee and asked the question. So she made him redo it.
Yeah.
While she was duct taped
While she was
to the
duct
tree.
taped there, yeah. So like you could tell she wanted to clap, but she's kind of, doing the hand wavy thing or whatever because her hands were still kind of free, but she couldn't really move them.
Yeah.
But
I hope somebody got her down.
well, I think someone did eventually.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I did eventually get down on one knee. I did propose properly, but yeah. So that's kind of but that conversation I think helped lay the foundation of our entire relationship.
It really did. It was really important of what our priorities were and establishing what each other's priorities were. And so we were unified in our priorities. And we didn't really have a lot of hobbies in common.
No, we really didn't.
But the important stuff we absolutely had in common. And I think that's made all the difference in our marriage.
Oh, it absolutely has. We have since, garnered hobbies together, and that's, I think, probably the most important thing. I think when it comes right down to it, when you first get together, the most important things in a relationship really should be those priorities. And after we got married, those priorities shifted a bit. Number one has always remained God.
For both of us.
For both of us. Number two and number three ended up switching. So it went from, our individual families to each other. So now we're each other's number two in that sense. And the reason why I kind of bring this up, and I think one of the things that really kind of spawned that conversation to begin with was kind of the conversation. It was a very similar conversation between President Hinckley and his wife, Marjorie.
Yeah.
Where she has like, Gordon, will you love nobody but me? And it's like, no, I'm sorry, I can't. I can't love anyone more than my God. And that's kind of been the foundation of their relationship as well.
I like their stories.
Yeah.
My other favorite one is where she wanted to show up to the gates of heaven covered in peanut butter because she had been taking care of her family.
Yes. And that kind of goes into, how those priorities have helped us with our parenting too.
Yeah.
And that's, I think kind of the important thing too, because when it comes to our individual relationship,
we do put our relationship above that of our relationship with our kids, and we love our kids
absolutely
so much. They are such a huge blessing in our life, and they're good kids.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that has been, mainly because like the Latter-day Saint doctrine of eternal marriage. We are going to be together for eternity. Forever. And while we are still going to be sealed to our children, after a certain point, they're going to be punted out of the house.
Well, but they will also hopefully each have a spouse that they care just as much about.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of the gospel, especially the restored gospel of Jesus Christ, is that it's meant to be a gospel of families and how we are all meant to be together as one giant family, starting with, like, each individual family unit always starts with that couple, that father and mother, that husband and wife. And that's one of the things that we hope for each of our kids, that they'll be able to find a spouse that is able to complement them and have the same priorities.
It's important to us to lead by example, that we keep those priorities in line, because those are the priorities that we hope that our kids will have as they grow and get married and continue their relationship with God and their testimonies.
And I think that's one of the things that we've kind of experienced as well. Because one of the things that, like, especially with that very first priority being God, that requires more revelation and more inspiration when it comes to how to best raise our children and raise our family.
Absolutely.
When you're, this is the great thing about, truly equal marriages I feel like, is that when we're both able to come and receive that same revelation. When we go to the Lord, when we come to the Lord, and either individually and as a couple. Maybe it's not in either. It's both.
Yes. Well, and it doesn't always happen at the same time.
No.
Like I really, really wanted to homeschool our children and felt really inspired to homeschool long before you did. It took a while to get you on board.
Yeah, well, and the thing is that, I, having gone to public school and having seen some of the more stereotypical homeschool thing, I didn't want our kids to be that. I didn't want our kids to be the stereotypical homeschool kids. Like, no.
I felt like that in high school too, that the homeschoolers were so weird. But a couple of things have made me not worried about that at all. First of all, is that it's so much more common and popular, and there's so many more resources and so many more families that are homeschooling. And the second thing is that school tends to conform. It helps kids conform to a norm, and in some ways that can be good because it helps them understand those social interactions. But in other ways, I think it's more important that children's biggest influences in their life is the adults in their life and not their peers, because then that allows them to find their own, what they're interested in.
Yeah.
And it allows them to kind of explore their weird, and generally what makes a kid weird makes an adult strong
and successful. Honestly.
Because if you're good at something that nobody else is good at, then you're and you know that you're good at that thing, you can be successful as an adult.
Right.
But as a kid, it just makes you a weird kid.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like you said, it took me a while to get on board with this, especially when it came to, especially with our oldest, because they went through, kindergarten and first grade, and we thought, or at least I thought, things were going okay.
I was a little bit more. You were at work a lot of the times when things were happening, but our oldest was a really, really curious kid and a really self-directed learner. There was a grocery store that went up across the street when he was in kindergarten, and they were handing out helium balloons, and he accidentally lost his balloon and it flew up to the ceiling. And most kids that happens to would have been really, really
distraught,
upset.
Yeah.
And he wasn't upset. He just asked, "Mom, why did that happen?" So we talked about helium as a gas, and I showed him the periodic table and where it was on the periodic table, and he said, "Well, what are all these other squares?" And so we started learning about hydrogen, and I was trying to think of examples of hydrogen, and so we were watching a documentary about the Hindenburg, and I said, midway through the documentary, I said, "All right, it's time for kindergarten," and he had a total meltdown.
Yeah, keep in mind, again, this is a kid who was in kindergarten learning about the Hindenburg. It seems like homeschooling was just destined for him, but that was the thing too. And then there was also an instant where, honestly, just public schooling was failing him.
Yes.
To be quite honest, he was still in kindergarten, and he wrote out a note that said, my child is sick today. So yeah,
no, he wrote my name.
Yeah, he wrote your name, and so that I think is kind of the thing there that was really kind of the biggest indicator that the public schooling system had failed him. It was when he wrote that note, said my child is sick, and he wrote your name.
Because he wanted to get out of going to school as a kindergartner.
But we kept him in until the first grade, and at that point, it's like, you know what? He's just not being challenged like he ought to be. He was practically at the top of his class, but he came home so bored all the time. There was just one day a week where he was able to do something that was beyond what was being normally taught in his first grade class, and he loved it. But it was only one day a week.
And during that time, I was doing a ton of studying about educational philosophies and different homeschooling strategies and curriculum. and I was praying a ton about it.
Yeah.
But you had had some really negative experiences
Mm-hmm.
with it in the past, and so you were not on board. So we ended up sending him to first grade.
Yeah. And so, but again, it was that first grade year that kind of put it on board for me. Like, okay, maybe we ought to do the homeschooling thing, with him.
Well, I was so shocked when we started talking about second grade, and I said, I'm not sending him to school this year. I'm going to homeschool him.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that you would fight me on it, and when you said okay, I was absolutely shocked. So
Yeah.
what was the process for you?
So again, like I had just seen how the public schooling system was ultimately failing him. And there wasn't really anything being done except there was the option to send him to a school that was nearly an hour away each day.
And I am not a morning person.
And
Getting up, driving that far, making sure he got to this school.
mm-hmm.
It was
or even putting him on a bus to send him that far.
Yeah.
Like that just wasn't really in the cards. And one of the things I think was kind of, important to realize here is that like he needed something more. And so we were kind of thinking that like, okay, well, what do we do here? Because in the past, not only was the whole homeschooling kid thing, like the weird homeschool kid thing, still kind of a stereotype at the time, but it was also like, okay, what kind of resources are available? But fortunately, by that point, the internet had exploded to such a great extent that you didn't need to be rich anymore to homeschool your kid. So many different resources became available. I mean, heck, YouTube was still, despite how young it technically was at the time, it was still, a great resource for, someone, getting into the homeschooling thing. And, just all of these different resources that were ultimately available to us. And there's far more now than there even were then.
Mm-hmm. Well, and we've had to continue to study and to
Mm-hmm.
pray about what resources to use for our kids because surprise, they're not all the same.
Right.
And one thing that works for one kid isn't necessarily going to work for the next kid.
Right. And this is where the concept of those priorities again come into play, is that, when we do place God first, we can receive that revelation in how to best help our children.
Well, we know and love our children.
Yeah.
But God knows and loves them even more than
Mm-hmm.
we do.
And so, he's able to direct us like, okay, for this child, this is the best way to go about it. For this child, this is, he's a bit more, into the science-y type stuff. This child is more into the performing arts, this kind of
as our kids have gotten older, we've been able to include them into that process
Mm-hmm.
as well with our Sunday meetings.
Yeah. Well, and this is something that's been fairly new that we've
Yes.
started.
I really like it though.
Yeah.
I think it's going really well.
So one of the things that, and this helps establish a bit more of a relationship with them as well, where we we're kind of going through their week. And we get them to kind of talk about like what are some things that you're kind of struggling with.
What went well, what went poorly.
Yeah, kind of like how like Bishop's interviews are supposed to be handled, in a way. Not to really like come down on someone, but more to see how best we can help them. And we help establish goals throughout the week. I mean, they have their larger goals that they want to accomplish throughout the school year, but then like how do they accomplish the mini goals throughout
Mm-hmm.
the rest of the week? And that's one of the things I think can has ultimately helped when it came to our kids, and it's it helped open up a lot of great discussions as well. And some things that we were just not even expecting to come out
Yeah.
of them. A lot of personal stuff that's come out, and everything like that we've been like, okay, well, how do we navigate this? Especially as they've gotten older and things like that. But this also helps entrench our relationship with them, knowing that like even like if it is just in these interview type settings, they know that they can talk to us, and there have been instances where they have, I don't know if they've come to you, but they have come to me to ask about certain things that are more life related.
Uh-huh.
Things like that. Our oldest has been talking a little bit more about relationships
What it means
and
to be a good
what it
friend
means to be
and
a good friend and potentially more romantic type stuff too.
has he?
Yeah, he has.
Oh.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. Um, but that's kind of the thing there is
That's where you
that
got to play it cool, play it cool,
yeah,
play
yeah,
it cool.
exactly. But at the same time, like, and I think this is another thing too, where there are certain things where you can go to mom about, and there's certain things you can only go to
Of
dad
course.
about. Because let's be honest, if he were to come to you about that, like, okay, who is she? What's her name? Kind of deal, and you'd be internally screaming like, no, my little baby's growing up.
Oh no,
No,
it's not a no. I'm excited for him.
no, yeah. Oh, well, okay,
I'm excited
all
to
right,
see our boys grow and become men.
yeah,
I mean, that's the goal. I don't want them to stay boys forever.
right.
I want them to be good, strong men with good,
Well, all of
strong
our kids, yeah.
testimonies.
And so that I think is something that's ultimately helpful too, because like with each of our kids, we want them to be, to have those priorities. And I think letting them know like what those priorities should be, especially while they're younger, and letting them know, yeah, those priorities can shift after they find their eternal companions. That, but no matter what, that first priority should always be God. And so, like with our kids, man, are they wild sometimes.
That's
but
an
I'm
understatement.
but I am actually been very pleased at how they have matured over the last little bit, and how they have started to grow in their own testimonies and things like that too. I mean, our oldest is, has been like really begging to get his patriarchal blessing.
Yeah.
And, I was like, okay, I am glad that you want to do that, but I think you need to
Here,
understand a little bit more about the Abrahamic covenant.
this guy wrote out a giant list of scriptures that he has to study in order to go get his patriarchal blessing.
I like when it comes to the patriarchal blessing in particular, there are certain things that, like, especially within the church, are considered rites of passage.
I think that it's not necessarily a church thing, but your grandpa's thing.
Yeah.
Your grandpa it was really important to him that you understood all of
Yeah,
that.
and well, and the
Because
thing
that
is,
wasn't my experience.
right. Well, and that's one of the reasons why I end each of my videos with the hashtag be good. That is something that is,
It's
directly
because
related to him.
something your grandpa said.
It was something that said every time that we left, and before he died. It was always be good. That was his way of saying farewell, and that's one of the And I figured, what, this would be a great homage to him to have that as the ending of each video.
I think it's a beautiful homage.
And that's one of the things that I'm trying to kind of implement within my kids, because there's been plenty of things that I learned from both of my grandfathers, as well as my own parents and things like that I've been wanting to pass down to my kids. And love and knowledge of the gospel, and that insatiable drive to continue learning, not just with the secular stuff, but also when it comes to gospel related topics. Letting them know, like, hey, these are the kind of things that you might be coming up against, but here's where you can actually discover that. But more importantly, how can you feel the Spirit? And again, this is where that priority of placing God first and then your family after that
and
is important.
in order to place God first, you have to know how to communicate with God, and that's confusing sometimes. I think it's a constant thing that all of us are working on,
Yeah.
of how do we best communicate with God, and how do we hear God's voice, and how do we know what God's will is.
Exactly.
And maybe we can have another podcast where we talk about that, because I think that's a really important subject.
Yeah, and man, we really could go deep into that too. We honestly could. But, just kind of keeping focused on our families and the priorities that we set with them, honestly, and within our own household. We're not perfect by any means. I
No.
mean, geez, I can't even tell you just how many sacrament meeting Sundays we have to break up fights on the pew. Like,
Oh.
my goodness.
Thankfully, the family that often sits behind us are similarly they have similar genders
Mm-hmm.
to ours. They just are more advanced
Yeah.
where all their kids are
Mm-hmm.
finishing. I think their youngest just got home from his
Yeah, so
mission.
there's a little bit of a
They get it.
they get it. They get it and they're understanding and everything like that. So it's like, okay, thank you. you know? But that I think is probably the biggest thing here. And this really kind of made things really impactful where a couple years ago there was that talk about how those of you that are still wrestling with little children, it's okay. The Lord sees you. The Lord understands you, and is doing and
There are
recognizes
there are
what you're
some
doing.
days where I'm saying hallelujah because the meeting is over.
Right. He was like, what was the sacrament meeting talk about? Oh, it was
I
the
have
High
no
Council
idea.
speaker. Half the congregation was asleep anyway. Okay, great. But no, like there have been a few good High Council talks. But the thing is though is that despite what they may be getting out of the sacrament meeting right off the bat, at least especially now at this point in their lives, it is helping establish that foundation where they
Well, and they love
recognize.
primary.
Yeah, they absolutely. Yeah, our youngest absolutely does. But when they're for the older ones in the young men's program, they have a lot of fun there too.
Hmm.
And
We have really good leaders in our ward.
we do. And
I'm really grateful.
I will be one of the first to admit, having experienced both ends of the spectrum and everything in between, we got truly blessed with the leadership in our area. Especially when it comes to leadership that actually listens to the concerns of everybody within the ward, and even in the stake at the stake leadership level as well, but also very clearly listens to the Spirit, like as a true servant of Christ ultimately should be. Now we do recognize that's not everybody's experience, but and we have experienced the opposite end.
We have, both of us. And it's
but
a lot harder
it is
when you don't have.
It is, but
When you
that's
don't have
but
that.
that's where the importance of those priorities being embedded at the very beginning to should help, because let's be honest here, there's a likelihood that we're going to have someone on the opposite end of the spectrum once again, where we're not going to have a leader, people in leadership that are as good as what we have now.
But if you have God as your priority
Mm-hmm.
and you have that personal relationship with God,
Mm-hmm.
then you can weather those storms
Yeah.
a little bit better.
Yeah. And and we saw no better example of this than just a few years ago during all the lockdowns and things like
Yeah.
that, where we were basically cut off from everybody. We had we were in a fairly new ward, and by the time everything was shut down, we'd only been going
Nobody
to
knew
church.
us.
Nobody knew us and things like that. And so but the thing is though is that, like, because of what had happened, we were essentially doing everything on our own. Having sacrament meeting at home, having
I
all
kind
of
of
this
liked home sacrament meeting.
in a way. In a way. I mean, I'm a bit of a social dude, so I mean, out of our relationship, I'm kind of more the social extroverted
you need
guy.
people. I'm happy to sit in my garden all by myself.
But that's
And the cat
yeah,
can
the
come
cat
too.
can come too. Yeah, but I think that's the thing, and that's ultimately what kind of showed that inspiration there. Like, with President Nelson and the rest of the First Presidency and the Quorum of the 12, recognizing that this was coming and implementing these these programs to begin with. And but again, it's that priority, placing God first above all else. And when it came to how we were handling things, we were fairly consistent. I'm I hesitate to say that we did it every single week, but we were fairly consistent when it came to at least holding some kind of sacrament service
Mm-hmm.
within our home at the time. And that really helped with kind of the spiritual recharge that we needed throughout the week. Now, for me personally, I'm glad that we were able to go back to church full time.
I am
uh,
too. I am too. But there was a certain kind of charm and
mm-hmm.
closeness to be able to take the sacrament together as
Yes.
a family. It
Yes.
kind of reminded me when I was a kid and we would go camping with our extended family, and we would have the sacrament together
Mm-hmm.
with just my grandma and grandpa and cousins,
Yeah.
and it was it was nice.
So, so kind of along with that, then, how have you personally seen how these priorities have helped our family? Really?
I think the most important aspect is that they keep us united because we're very different people. We love each other immensely, but in personality, we are opposites. And so we often come to different conclusions about what the best thing is for our family. And so when we do come to those different conclusions, we often turn to prayer
Mm-hmm.
and figure out, well, this is what I want and this is what he wants, but what does God want? And sometimes it takes us a while. Sometimes it takes a trip to the temple. But every single time that has happened, we have eventually come to a place of unity. Not a place of compromise of, oh, I guess I'll just do whatever he wants to do, but a place of true unity because we're both sacrificing our own wills for what God wants. And we know, both of us know, because we have that relationship with Heavenly Father, that if we do sacrifice what we want for what God wants, then our family will be so much more successful and we will have so much more joy.
Yeah. That I think is one of the things that, you know, I remember probably the last time we went to the temple. It wasn't terribly long ago. It was like maybe a month or two. We don't live close to a temple despite living, in a place where there's a lot of temples. But I remember while we were talking on our way to the temple, talking about some of the things that we wanted to, get further direction on.
Mm-hmm.
And we were probably about 5-10 miles away, and we were already receiving revelation and already that confirmation about what God wanted us to focus on
Mm-hmm.
at that particular point. And the spirit was palpable just in the car between the two of us at that point in time.
Yeah.
And recognizing again that unity there, that because again we had set that priority, our sights on God, and we were moving toward him together,
Yeah.
we were able to again come to that conclusion. And this is the one thing that especially within our relationship, and our relationship is not going to be like anyone else's. This is our
No.
relationship and what
No.
has worked for us, and how we have been able to utilize the roles that are established in the family proclamation, and recognize that as that aspect is meant to be exactly that. It's meant to be equal. We have different roles to fill, but it's more complementary as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to you know diametrically opposed or whatever. And that's the way I think it's supposed to be.
Oh, absolutely.
Where
We complement each other.
absolutely, and so it's not like one of us is better than the other, or anything like that. Like any decision that we have for our family
We
is,
make together
yeah,
with God.
it's a mutual decision between the two of us. And we don't always agree, but when we don't agree, we don't implement it.
Right.
you know and it annoys the heck out of our kids. It annoys the heck out of them. It's like, they'll try to pit us against each other, and
Oh, if they don't like mom's answer, go to dad and see what he says.
yeah, and see what he says. But the thing is, though, is that like 9 times out of 10 we give the same answer.
Yeah.
And that I think is absolutely fantastic. Like it can sometimes be a little weird just how in sync we sometimes are. But that I think is the important thing, is where that foundation is, and that's where that unity and that synchronicity ultimately comes from, is from that foundation of where our priorities have lied from the
Absolutely.
very beginning.
Yeah. And I think I mean, honestly, I think that's a great place to end it. It's a good sum up of what our values are and what's important to us.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this episode of Language of Lions. Go ahead and click that subscribe button and that bell. If you like this video, go ahead and click that like button as well, and share it with everybody else who you think might benefit from this. In the meantime, we'll catch you in the next video.
Bye.
See ya.